This is For Your Info Podcasts, a production of Solutions by CAT. Welcome to a breakfast series by Assets Lancaster, transforming communities through business. This November 2015 installment is Localist Policies. Thanks to our sponsors, ERX Contracting and Solutions by CAT, marketing and advertising with passion.
Thanks for coming out on Election Day. How appropriate to be talking about localist policies in the former city council chambers while voting is happening next door on Election Day. So we're glad that you could be here. I'm Jessica King. I'm the Executive Director of Assets. We're doing this 8-month Transforming Communities Through Business breakfast series. And today is focused on localist policies. We're going to have a panel this morning where they'll discuss 10 or 15 minutes from their experience, but have an opportunity for interchange with you all. So be thinking about questions that you have about how, questions about state, local, or beyond government, and questions about what they have to say, or questions about things that you're concerned about that you think have a policy implication that we can talk about further. So the goal is to have a conversation. Be thinking about questions as they're talking. Jim Schultz is the Program Development Director for Lancaster Housing Opportunity Partnership. He was one of the founding members of LHOP and was a member of the board of the original LHOP. He came onto the staff there in January of 2012, and he's passionate about affordable housing issues because he was raised in public housing in the city of Lancaster. Jim spent 6 years as president of the Housing Development Corp of Lancaster, developing 10 affordable housing buildings and communities. He spent his entire career dealing with city problems, including 5 years as community development director in the city of Allentown. Jim has taught for 22 years a class in city government at his alma mater, Franklin and Marshall College, and actually one of our interns was talking about how much the students there really appreciate Jim's class. So he has spent considerable time on numerous community boards and task forces, and he takes particular joy in his involvement with Bring Baseball Back to Lancaster committee that got both Clipper Magazine Stadium built and the Barnstormers organization to begin playing baseball in the city of Lancaster. He enjoys watching his 2 grandsons grow up, reading history and political books, and watching baseball and college football, and traveling with his wife, Dawn. So thanks for being here. Mike Sturla is our representative representing Lancaster City, the 96th Legislative District, and he was born and raised in Lancaster County. He graduated from Garden Spot High School and the University of Kansas with a degree in environmental design. While he was still in college, he started a small painting and renovating business with his brother that later became Sturla Brothers Incorporated Construction and Contracting, and he would later form Architrave, an architecture and design business with several partners. He began his public service in 1987 when he was elected to Lancaster City Council, meeting in this room, and he also served as a member of the Lancaster County Planning Commission in 1990 until he was elected to the Pennsylvania State House of Representatives in 1991. So for more than 20 years, Mike has diligently served the citizens of the 96th District, which includes Lancaster City and parts of Lancaster Township and Manheim Township. He volunteers in the community and serves on various boards, including the Shriner Concord Cemetery, the Lancaster County Workforce Investment Board, and the Stevens College Community Advisory Council. Throughout his career, he served on a variety of House standing committees, including appropriations, transportation, health, education, urban affairs, and aging. As chairman of the Professional Licensure Committee in the 2007-8 season, he shepherded through 22 laws. He's also been a member of the Capital Preservation Committee and the Chesapeake Bay Commission. In the 2009-10 legislative session, he was elected by his Democratic colleagues to the leadership position of Democratic Policy Committee Chairman. So he's been re-elected to this post for each subsequent session. In this role, he's instrumental in crafting the caucus's policy agenda. So it's fabulous to have Mike here today talking about policy, considering that he's the chair of our state policy committee. Thanks so much for being here. And last but not least, Pat Brogan, and who's hilarious, didn't have a bio for me, but I love this bio. She is the mayor's chief of staff. She grew up in Pottstown and spent 12 years going to Catholic school, including being the prom queen from St. Pius X High School. That's fabulous. She graduated from Millersville University and worked for Planned Parenthood for about 20 years, where she served as vice president for legislative affairs and community relations. So she did a lot of consulting for about a year before Mike Sturla hired her as chief of staff in 2003. She's been a campaign communications and strategy operative for just about every election between 1983 and 2005, including candidates for local, state, and federal office. She joined Mayor Gray in 2006 when he started his first term after his landslide victory in 2005. She's been a real pleasure to get to know as a friend and colleague, and I'm so pleased to have you here. So we're going to go ahead and let them speak. I think we'll start with you, Jim, and work our way down the table.
Jessica indicated most of my career has been dealing with city issues and city problems, and specifically housing-related problems. So I'm going to talk this morning about the economic impact of housing on the Lancaster community. So, for example, one of the things I would like to say is how would we like to see about $15 to $30 million per year spent by local residents on local goods and services come to pass. That would happen if the federal government would fund Section 8 housing vouchers for all qualified families. Families who get the Section 8 vouchers pay no more than 30% of their income on rent. If the rent exceeds what they can pay with that 30% cap, then the federal government pays the rent balance to the landlord. So, for example, if the rent is $1,000 and the renter can only afford to pay $500, for example, let's say that they're a family that has income of $20,000 a year, poor family, they don't have to pay any more than $500 a month rent, because 30% of $20,000 is $6,000, divided by 12 is $500, and the feds pay the balance of the $500. The Section 8 program has been around since the Nixon administration, and it has been a highly successful program. So this is not something tried that hasn't been tried. This is a program that works. However, only 1/3 of the eligible Section 8 families receive this subsidy, meaning that 2/3 of the families cannot get into the program. These non-subsidized families must go into the rental marketplace and pay that $1,000 per month rent, which means they're paying 40, 50, 60% of their incomes on rent. In my example of that $20,000 per year family, at $1,000 per month, they're paying 60% of their income in rent. They're going to be poor forever. If those renters in Lancaster City who are not in the Section 8 program became eligible, that would free up monthly money to be spent in the Lancaster economy. How much money would be freed up? Well, for every $100 of rent savings per month, that would generate $7.5 million of money for local goods and services in the city of Lancaster only. That's only in the city of Lancaster. So my earlier figure of $15 to $30 million is based on savings based on $200 to $400 per rental household in the city. It's interesting that lenders apply what's called the 30% rule for those applying for a mortgage. That is, they will not provide a mortgage if the mortgage payments are in excess of 30% of the family's income. Yet, for our most economically vulnerable, that is, poor renters, there is no 30% rule. It's whatever the market will bear. And with the apartment market so tight today, landlords can increase rents knowing if the family can't afford the rent, they'll find somebody else to fill it. So one policy objective should be to fund the Section 8 housing voucher program so that 100% of eligible families would have access to affordable rents. This would put millions of dollars into the local economy. It would provide affordable rental payments for those living in poverty, and it would not negatively impact on the rental income coming into the landlords and keep those revenues in the local economy as well. And by the way, the federal government today spends 4 times as much money on the interest rate tax deduction for homeowners than it does for providing rental assistance for poor people. Another policy action relating to housing in the Lancaster economy would be to fix up existing rental units through more frequent code enforcement of rental properties. As I just mentioned, landlords today are getting great rental incomes due to a lack of rental units throughout Lancaster City and County. But, as Randy Patterson will tell you, that rental income, that increased income that landlords are getting, is not being translated into keeping the rental units in good condition. Due to budgetary constraints, the City of Lancaster inspects rental units every 4 years. Not every 4 months, every 4 years. Within that 4-year period, the interior conditions can deteriorate without the property owner being accountable to fix up the conditions. Property owners have learned to make sure that the exterior conditions of the rental units are okay, because then the neighbors can't complain and the inspectors don't show up. So if the interior conditions do deteriorate, why doesn't the renter complain to the city? I can give you one very real example where we had a property in the city on Strawberry Street where the rental property did not have a central heating system. So space heaters had to be used during the past 2 winters, if you remember the last 2 winters. In addition, there was no electrical panel, so the electric in the house was constantly being going off because of putting the heating system in terms of the space heaters. In asking the resident why didn't she complain to the city, she indicated she was on a 30-day lease. And the only other person other than herself who knew about these conditions, because the conditions are inside the building, you don't see them, okay, was the landlord. If she complained and the city took action to have the landlord fix the conditions, she was very concerned about two eventualities. Her rent would be increased to pay for the fix-up costs, and she and her two kids would be evicted and out on the street. What is needed is a Pennsylvania whistleblower's law, similar to the one in the state of Ohio, that would protect renters from being evicted for complaining about their living conditions. So what I'm saying to you is if you go to the housing people here in the city, they'll tell you that, yes, the landlord has every right, and during that 30-day lease period, at the end of the 30-day lease period, for whatever reason, doesn't really have to give a reason, just says, I'm not renewing the lease, for that person to be out on the street. So what would the economic impact of more frequent inspections and the whistleblower law have? Those increased rent revenues that are not going into properties would be spent on rehabbing improvements, making the properties more viable, making them more valuable, while the neighborhoods are improved and the families are living in better conditions. No one should live in those kinds of conditions. Another policy objective is the actual production of more affordable rental units throughout Lancaster County. HDC and Community Basics, two local nonprofit developers, are solid developers of affordable rental units. I can take you to apartment communities throughout Lancaster City and County for low to moderate income people that have been developed by HDC and Community Basics. We have tremendous assets in terms of those two communities. However, they are dependent on the federal low-income housing tax credit program and its administration by the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency. And as a result, because of the limited amount of tax credits that are available, and now the PHFA has thrown Lancaster into the same region as Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, no low-income housing projects were funded in South Central Pennsylvania in the entire 2015 round. We have a desperate need for new affordable rental units in Lancaster County, and we have two great developers of such units. But the lack of tax credits does not allow the community to meet the rental housing need. So long as production of rental units is denied, the existing rental units are highly occupied, allowing landlords to increase rents, making rental units less and less affordable, and placing families into financially vulnerable positions. In addition, the federal government also has another tax credit program called the 4% credit that would allow mixed income apartment developments where you actually deliberately have market rate mixed in with affordable housing. It has all kinds of benefits for the families, for the economy. But unlike other surrounding states, the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency has never funded a rental community using this tax credit program. This tax credit program has been available for 30 years. Why? Because PHFA would need to get the Pennsylvania legislature to provide a subsidy to make the program work. That's what the other states do. And the PHFA refuses to go to the legislature for that subsidy authorization. I consider PHFA's non-action on this program to be immoral because of the positive ramifications that the use of the program would have on low-income families. The local economic ramifications for using these tax credit programs are people would be employed in the construction of apartment projects. And second, I passed out a brochure on your table dealing with the need for rental housing in Lancaster County based on LHOP's recent housing market study. LHOP completed this market study of the entire Lancaster County community and concluded that without a full range of housing options, including affordable rentals, the entire housing sales change could languish. If families are paying too much for rent due to the lack of affordable rental units, those renters who are potentially entry-level homebuyers are not in a financial position to purchase. The county could experience an oversupply of single-family homes, thus risking declining home values and economic stagnation. The last local economic policy should be to convert as many renters into homeowners as possible. Today, with rental rates sky high, a family could live more economical if they owned their home rather than rent. Those savings could be spent in the local economy. Using my previous example, if the rental rate is $1,000, including utilities, a $75,000 mortgage of a house in the city at 4.5% interest for 30 years would be $380 a month. Adding taxes, utilities, and insurance, that family would be paying approximately $800 a month. Family would be saving $200 per month to be spent in the local economy, while the family is also experiencing the American dream of building up wealth. Local programs are available for first-time homebuyers. LHOP, for example, offers a second mortgage program to pay closing costs and provide down payment assistance. We've helped almost 2,000 families to get into their homes through using that program. Local families can also avail themselves of credit counseling offered by Tabor and SACA to get the family into a position to qualify for a mortgage. Another way to get homes into the hands of first-time homebuyers is to have LHOP and other nonprofits purchase condemned houses without having to pay the redevelopment authorities just compensation costs. That is, at the end of the day, after a property has been condemned and taken by the redevelopment authority, we as a nonprofit have to pay to the redevelopment authority a just compensation cost, $20,000, $25,000, for a property that I have to put $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 in to bring it back. I can't make the numbers work. So this would put a condemned property into a homeowner opportunity at a price that is keeping with the price of the neighborhood. If you purchase the condemned property for just compensation plus the rehab costs, the property is not financially feasible. Why should a property owner who has milked all the income out of a property, taken a tax deduction, let the property deteriorate and not cooperate with the city to the point of being condemned, get just compensation? Pennsylvania eminent domain law needs to be changed to not require just comp in those circumstances. Otherwise, by having to pay just comp and the rehab costs of the condemned property, the properties are not financially feasible to be rehabbed and sold to the public without losing lots of money. For example, we did a property on Strawberry Street that conventionally would have cost $100,000 to $110,000 of rehab. Nobody touched it for 7 years because the market in that neighborhood is $75,000. We were able to convince the redevelopment authority to take it down to $1. So we bought the property for $1, we put $60,000 into it, and we sold the house for $75,000 for a first-time home buyer. All kinds of positive economic ramifications occur when families move from being renters to homeowners. Families build wealth, neighborhoods improve, and the city has one less rental unit to inspect. So to conclude, at the federal level, get Section 8 funded for 100% of eligible families. At the federal and state levels, get more tax credits and get PHFA to provide a subsidy program for the 4% mixed income projects. At the local level, get more funding for more city inspectors to inspect rental units more frequently and create a whistleblower law by the Pennsylvania legislature. And finally, at the local level, convert more renters into homeowners and change the Pennsylvania eminent domain law to allow for the taking of condemned properties without having to pay just compensation to the owners who've been clearly compensated. So I hope my presentation has given you something to think about, and I'll be more than happy to answer any questions.
As was pointed out when Jessica introduced me, I was a city councilman at one point in time in the city here. And, you know, the old saying that all politics is local, the reason that I ended up running for city council some 30 years ago was because there was a parking issue in my neighborhood. And so I went to city council as a citizen and said, hey, there's a parking issue in my neighborhood. There's a private parking lot that all the neighbors would park in at night, and we'd leave in the morning, and the people that owned the parking lot would have their employees park there during the day, and they would leave, and we'd come and park there at night. And they ended up selling that parking lot, and it ended up getting turned into a playground. And so everybody in the neighborhood said, gee, where do we park now? I mean, we've been poachers on that private land for years, and there's not really enough space on the street. So we came to city council and, you know, like citizens do, and said, anything you can do to help us out. And I'll never forget it. We were told that, you know, there's plenty of parking space in the garages. Don't worry about it. It's only at that point in time, I think it was $43 a month or something like that. And, you know, that parking garage is only a block away from you. Don't worry about it. About 6 months later, I read the newspaper, and there was the headline that said, 2 new parking garages needed in the city, will cost $6 million, waiting list 800 people long. I said, gee, that's a pretty quick fill-up of the parking garages. I was told 6 months ago there was plenty of space, and now there's a waiting list of 800 people, and we need 2 new parking garages. So I came back to city council, and I said, hey, I got a question. You know, I was here 6 months ago looking for parking, no parking. You said not a problem. Now you need 2 new parking garages. And they said, okay, thanks for bringing that to our attention. Which, you know, if anybody knows me, that was my clue to come back every 2 weeks and go to the city council meeting and say, hey, I got a question for you. I'm still looking for an answer. And eventually became a city councilman because I was still looking for the answer. The outcome of that was that one of those parking garages ended up being built in my neighborhood, and I actually was helpful with the design in terms of making sure that the houses weren't shaded by a tall parking garage. It was tiered, and but the upshot of all that is that all politics is local. I would not be in anybody's problem from the opposition standpoint if somebody had just solved my parking problem 30 years ago. Part of what I've done as a state representative then is to look at how things actually work and what the real result of some of the policies are. And as examples, I've been on just recently on the Education Funding Commission to look at the funding formula for basic education, and prior to that I was on the Education Funding Commission to look at special education and help develop those funding formulas, which were way out of whack. I mean, we are currently, because we haven't adopted that funding formula yet, the most inequitable state in terms of the way we fund education. We have some schools that spend more than $25,000 per student, and we have others that spend less than $10,000 per student. And how anyone can say that that is an equitable system is beyond me, but we try and tend to justify that by saying, well, if the locals want to spend that much money, go ahead, let them knock themselves out. I think we've devised a funding formula that will close that gap, and if we can ever get the funding for it, the problem is nobody wants to just say, hey, the new formula is in place tomorrow, because there's 500 school districts in the state of Pennsylvania, and when you do a fair funding formula using the same dollars that we currently put into education, 300 school districts get less money and 200 get more. And you can imagine where the votes come out on the floor of the House with those kind of numbers. So the only way we get to a fairer funding formula is to add new money, and every time we add new money, only give it to the 200 school districts that are being shortchanged currently. That's part of where we're headed. But nonetheless, the spreadsheet on that education funding formula that I just talked about, we printed out on 8.5 by 14 sheets of paper. It was 6 sheets wide and 11 sheets deep. So you can imagine the complexity of this, but at the same time, I can, if you wanted to, sit down with you and in about a minute explain how that funding formula actually works so that you could look at any of those figures and understand where it came from. One of the things that I'm happy about is that I really pushed for a weighting of poverty because particularly coming from an urban district, I see not only does poverty impact the educational attainment of kids, but in particular the concentration of poverty, and there's a special factor for the concentration of poverty and how that impacts kids' ability to learn. And by concentration of poverty, when you think about it, if you take a kid that's in poverty and you place him in a wealthy school district, they'll make friends with those wealthy kids, and they'll go over to those kids' house, and they have access to computers and books and parents that have master's degrees and all sorts of things. And that kid is not nearly as impacted by poverty as the kid who is in a school that has a concentration of poor kids, and all his friends are poor, and they go to each other's houses, and no one has books, and few people have computers, and all the parents have less than a high school education, and that impact is devastating. And so we say to the school, go ahead, make up the difference for us. And one of the examples that I always use is my kids went to Fulton Elementary here in the school district of Lancaster. And at the time, it was during the Ridge administration, we were working on distressed school legislation because we were going to fix schools. And so we were looking at test scores and seeing which schools didn't perform. And lo and behold, Fulton Elementary did not perform. And as a result, therefore, neither was the school district of Lancaster performing because it was a distressed school. And the way they determined that was that the kids on average were in the bottom quartile of statewide averages. Now, the thing with those kinds of statistics is somebody's always going to be in the bottom quartile. I mean, I always, half of everybody who graduated from medical school was in the bottom half of their class. It's the reality. But needless to say, the fact that those kids were now labeled as distressed meant that if they didn't improve test scores, they were going to start cutting funding to that school, which, again, doesn't make any sense, because if it's a distressed school, you should put more funding in, not less funding. But so I went to the principal and I said, explain to me how it is that, I should not move my kids to another school in the city of Lancaster, because I can go to any of the elementary schools in the city because it's the school district of Lancaster. And he said, look, we did 5th grade PSSAs, and at the time, there were 87 kids in the 5th grade that had taken the PSSAs. And he said, if you disaggregate the scores, there are 12 of those 87 kids that have been at Fulton Elementary since they were in 1st grade. Now, you would think if this was a really horrible school, the kids who had been there the longest would be the ones that would be subjected to the most punishment. They had obviously been facing this abuse for 5 years. They should be the worst. Amazingly enough, those 12 kids were in the top quartile of statewide averages. And that was in a school where every year they would start with 500 kids, 350 kids would leave the school, and 350 new kids would come by the time they got to June. So 70% turnover. That school serves the homeless shelters. It's also a high transitory rate in terms of apartments and things like that. But those teachers, even with 70% of their kids turning over, could teach the kids that actually stayed in that classroom all year long at a rate higher than the statewide average. So it wasn't that the teachers were bad. It wasn't that the school was bad. It was the circumstances that they were dealing with every day, where kids would come in and stay in school for 3 or 4 weeks and go move, and somebody else would come in and leave and come back and come back in October and leave again in April. And, so again, part of that is looking at what the end product tells you, which is that's a bad school, and saying, is it really a bad school and why? Explain that to me. And so that's part of what I do all day long. I have 5 people that work for me in Harrisburg, and all they do is research. And I sit there and say, okay, go find out this information for me. Go find that information out for me. And sometimes, you say, oh gosh, that isn't what I thought was going to be the outcome. Other times it's like, okay, I kind of suspected that, because, you have to sort of learn how to read some of these things. But anyway, I've spent a whole lot of time working on education at the state level to try and figure out how to make it a fairer and more equitable system in the state of Pennsylvania. It's half our state budget. It's the biggest line item. It's the only thing that we're mandated to do by the Constitution. I mean, we could not do transportation, we could not do prisons, we could not do anything else we do, and we would not be violating the Constitution. But the Constitution says we're supposed to provide for a fair and equitable system for our kids to go to school. That's something I've spent a lot of time on. But just to give you an idea of some of the other issues that I think impact locally, of course, obviously the budget. Anybody who knows what's been going on at the state level knows that the budget impacts all sorts of local services and agencies, the county, local municipalities. But beyond that, one of my pet peeves that I've been working on for quite a few years, actually, is you probably may not know this, but we take right now in this year's budget a projected $750 million a year out of the motor license fund to fund the state police. Now, the way that we can do that is the motor license fund is a restricted account that says it has to be related to roads. So the way they relate the state police to roads is they say, well, they actually patrol the roads. So that's how we can take of their $1 billion budget for state police, we take $750 million from the motor license fund. Now, here's the thing. That means that that's not for all the forensic lab stuff. That's not for all the stuff that any of us that live in a community that has local police think of as what the state police do. That means it's $750 million for patrolling roads. Where do they patrol roads? In the rural parts of the state that don't have a local police department. That's 21% of the state's population. So 21% of the state's population gets free policing paid for by the other 80% of the state's population. And then, oh, by the way, you also pay your own local tax bill for police. And in most municipalities, it's about 50% of the cost of your local tax bill. So when I said, oh, you know what, these local municipalities actually ought to be paying for the state police protection, I actually had a township supervisor call me and he said, you realize that we would actually have to double our taxes if we had to pay for police. And I said, yeah, that makes sense because 50% of my bill pays for police in my local taxes. And he said, yeah, but we'd have to go from 1 mil to 2. Which if anybody knows, what are we at in the city of Lancaster? 17, that's what I thought, yeah. So, I mean, my heart bled for him. So those are the kinds of issues. Now, the sad part about this is you would think with 80% of the people in the state of Pennsylvania being represented by a local police department, we wouldn't have a hard time passing this legislation. But because of the way districts are made up, I happen to live in a district where 100% of my constituents are in a paid police department. A lot of guys live in a district where 60% is paid, 40% gets it for free. They go, oh, don't tell my 60% that they're paying for the 40%, because that would upset the 40%, and they would now have to pay, and these guys would be upset that so please just stop talking about that issue. We just don't talk about it. It's been a hard climb on that one. I'm getting close because more and more, the more I talk about it, the more members say to me, explain this to me. How does this work? But again, that's digging into the weeds on this thing, because you just look at a budget that's got, 30 or 40 billion dollars in it, and you go, well, $750 million coming out of the motor license fund to pay for the state police. Hey, it helps balance our budget. We didn't need to take it out of the general fund. And I don't think we should take it out of the general fund either. If we're providing, assistance to those municipalities. The other sort of fun thing is if you take a map of the Marcellus Shale region and you take a map of where they get free police protection, I defy you to tell me which is which, because they're almost exactly the same. And those are the people that are getting that Marcellus Shale impact fee and claim that they have nothing to spend it on. So there's that state police issue. The other place that I think has started to come to light, and this relates back to Jim's thing, and then I'll stop talking because otherwise I'll fill in. We'll be way late. When the study came out that said you need to be making, I think it's $22 an hour for a family of 4 in order to be making a living wage in Lancaster County. Think about what the minimum wage is. It's $7.25 an hour. Every state around us has raised the minimum wage above the federal minimum wage. We haven't. And so if somebody, a family of 4, 2 parents working, they need to hold down 3 minimum wage jobs. So they each need to work 60 hours a week in order to have that family survive. The alternative is, if we go to $10.10 an hour, now they can get by on 2 full-time jobs. Nobody gets to stay at home and, be a laggard. 2 full-time jobs. They can now subsist in Lancaster County. Jim's saying, look, we ought to subsidize housing more, and I agree. We ought to be doing more in terms of making sure that's affordable. The other way is I can push from the bottom and say, actually, if I let that person make a living wage, they can pay for it and I don't need to subsidize it as much. And, oh, by the way, there's a whole lot of other benefits to increasing the minimum wage. Unlike increasing the minimum wage of the CEO, who's already capped out on his Social Security payments, every dollar that you pay somebody in minimum wage gets taxed for Social Security, and that goes and helps strengthen that system. Every time you do that, those families, by and large, will not keep their 3 jobs at $10.10 an hour and suddenly go, wow, what are we doing with all this money? They say, actually, let's just work 2 minimum wage jobs at $10.10 an hour, and that frees up a job for someone else. I always get this, people will just lay people off. As a former businessman, I never, in the entire time I was in business, just hired people because labor was cheap and said, you know what, just sit beside me. That's okay. It doesn't matter if you do anything today, prop your feet up. I'm so happy I'm getting you for cheap. It's great. I love it. And then they said, oh, minimum wage is higher. Well, now you're laid off. I hired people because I had a job to do and I needed to get something completed. And so, this notion that people will just wholesale be laid off, when all the states around us raised their minimum wage, no one got laid off. In fact, in those states in 2014 that increased the minimum wage, their job creation actually went up. So, it really does do something for the economy locally. every one of those dollars. If you're making minimum wage, you're not taking it and going on a trip to Bimini somewhere. Every dollar gets reinvested in your local community. So there really are a lot of impacts. I mean, I got a list of 50 things here I could talk about, but I'll turn it over to Pat now. Thanks.
My guess is that you are all going to vote, and so to a certain extent, being here talking to you today is kind of like preaching to the choir. It's the people out there who don't vote, and particularly who don't vote in local elections, who I think we really have to do more work and outreach with, because, I think that local government is where the rubber hits the road, and that's what I'll kind of focus on today. I think, and Mike knows this, he's not gonna be shocked when I say all too often state government puts bumps in the road. And where the local government is where services are delivered. And I'll tell you, I think when it comes to voting, I got involved with this mayor like I got involved with Mike and every other elected official that I know of, and that is I started as a campaign volunteer. And in fact, Jim worked on that campaign as well and was really valuable as far as some issues and strategy development. So, I did that campaign, and I will tell you, for about 20 years, at the end of every campaign, I would say, "Oh my God, I'll never do this again," and I'd say, "This is my last campaign." Well, then I did the mayor's campaign, and I thought, the night before the election, I said to him, "Whether you win or not, I will tell you that this campaign reminds me of why I got into politics in the first place." And that's what, when I think back on that, we can, as an electorate, expect, and this is my expectation of the mayor, that then and now, is that they have a plan, that they have an agenda, that they want to accomplish something besides getting elected. It's often said, it's easy to want to be mayor. The question is, do you want to do mayor? And that's the important part. So when you find, and that's what we should be asking of all of our candidates. You want to be president. What do you want to do, president? Because that's really hard. And what does that mean to you? And I think that in terms of local government, if you have the opportunity to work for somebody or with somebody or vote for somebody who has a plan, who has an agenda, hold them accountable then to implementing that agenda. I'm going to just tie in a few of it to what Jim and Mike talked about with respect to how those the issues that Mike and Jim talked about really play on the local level. And Jess asked me to talk about how local policies affect day-to-day life, people's day-to-day lives. Simply, a lot of people in here don't know, 10 years ago, on any given day, you would have anywhere from 16 to 25 trash trucks collecting all through the city. Now, that doesn't sound like a big deal until you're trying to get through the city on any given day, and there's trash trucks around, and the trash is spilling out over the trash trucks, and there's no recycling was horrible. The recycling performance in the city of Lancaster was embarrassingly low. And so one of the things that we decided to do early on was to go to a single hauler trash program. So instead of having 26 different trash trucks out at all hours of the day, every day of the week in various neighborhoods, some neighborhoods would have 6 trash trucks in a day, on the same day or on the same block. So we went to a single hauler trash program. That sounds minor, but it was very controversial at the time, and but it was the right thing to do. And that's what we need to expect from government, to focus on the right thing and be able to justify that, and not worry about who gets credit. When we talked about rental inspections, and there's a lot that needs to be done with rental property inspections. back in the day, rental properties were inspected only on a complaint basis. If somebody called in to complain about a property, it was an inspector was sent out. The city ordinances required inspections to be done every 4 years, but they weren't. They were only done when somebody complained. Now we have what's called systematic inspections, where every 4 years we have properties inspected, whether there's a complaint or not. And that really has made a huge difference in the quality of the housing stock. Huge difference. The other thing that we've tried to do on a local level is really deal with problem, and we'll call them negligent landlords, and there's some other words for them, but the negligent landlords who really exploit renters and basically take the money and run. There was a time when the city had no database on how many rental properties there were, and that's changed. We now have a database, and we require that landlords pay a licensing fee and that all their rental properties be registered. That's made a huge difference in the quality of the housing stock and in the number of problem landlords there are today. I mean, I think there were about 18 landlords who we had identified as negligent. And there are probably, I think, four to six now who we're still trying to rehabilitate. Unfortunately, I will tell you that on a state level, state laws all too often, and this is it's either a socialist or a communist thing to say, whichever it might be. I take full responsibility for it, and that is state laws all too often favor of private property owners or bad property owners in the name of private property rights. Private property rights shouldn't allow exploitation, but it does. I mean, one example, for instance, a few years ago, the state twice extended the amount of time that a building before a municipality could allow a building permit to expire. So what you have is, instead of a year to fix up a property, you now have 2 years. Then they took it to 3 years. So you have people owning properties, vacant properties, for 3 years. They don't have to do a damn thing to it. So, and what does that do? It creates a vacant, oftentimes blighted property in a neighborhood. Neighbors are calling the mayor's office saying, "Why are you guys letting this go?" Well, we can't do anything because Mike let those people in Harrisburg have their private property rights and so forth. Anyhow, the other thing that I think that you need to be paying attention to as far as local policies. Obviously, Pennsylvania is just notoriously dysfunctional in the way government operates and is formed. Does anybody here work for county government? Okay, what does county government do? The courts and the prisons. They also are the pass-through for social service agency funding. The pass-through. Do you need a whole layer of government to do that? Maybe, I don't know. But I can tell you, this county government, here's what they do. They don't raise taxes. Now, it costs the city about $1.5 million in lost property tax revenue because of county government offices located in the city. Now, city taxpayers are also county taxpayers. So basically, city residents are subsidizing county government. We pay county taxes, I'm a city resident, county taxes and city taxes, right? But the county doesn't pay anything to the city because they're tax exempt. And Jim Schultz will tell you that if we had revenue sharing, that would be remedied somewhat. So that, and by revenue sharing, Jim schooled me on this. The county government would pay a portion, a fee to the municipalities, be they townships, boroughs, or the city, in which the county facilities were located. So that we were getting something for providing the services. City police provide a lot of service to the county prison, the fire bureau. We're reporting to the county government center uses fire services and police services all the time. Who do you think was paying when the inmates over at the prison were flushing toilets or towels down the toilets and clogging up the sewer system? The city taxpayers, because we had to fix it. So I think that Pennsylvania, in terms of the layers of government, in terms of the fragmentation of government, I mean, it's been said so many times that it just doesn't work. Do I think that's going to change? No, because you have the rural versus urban split in the legislature, where most of the population of Pennsylvania is represented by a small amount of votes. So in other words, you have maybe 30 or 60 votes from urban legislators, and the rest are all rural.
60, and that counts Philly and Pittsburgh.
Okay, 60, and that counts Philly and Pittsburgh. So you have 60 votes in the state house that are representing urban interests, and yet the urban areas cover, I think, 60% of the state's population. So it's out of balance. So why does that matter? Well, it matters when you talk about things like funding for police or state police. It matters when you talk about things like funding for fire services. Right now in Pennsylvania, only volunteer fire companies are eligible for state grants, not paid fire bureaus, and yet that's where most of the costs for fire services would be in the urban fire bureaus that are paid. The state laws right now, the Uniform Construction Code is applied statewide, and it favors rural areas to the disadvantage of older cities. The Uniform Construction Code does not work in an older urban area where you want to do projects that involve adaptive reuse. It makes the projects unaffordable for development. Jim talked about private property, about eminent domain and about blighted properties and just comp. The City Redevelopment Authority has to pay slumlords just comp for a building that, basically buildings that could be most often are falling apart. So those kinds of things, state laws we really need to take a look at how we can support and help, and if only remove obstructions from the progress and the success of local governments and local municipalities. Because otherwise we're really very much on our own, and we spend more time and more money and more effort trying to get around those obstructions than actually getting the job done and delivering service. And I think also, finally, I want to talk just a little bit about, because I could go on a lot about what obstructions the state could remove, Mike, but they don't. Property taxes. For 35, 40 years, oh my God. We've been talking about the need for property tax reform. They still haven't gotten it done. Mike.
This year.
Now, Does it make any sense to rely on property taxes to pay for all public works, public safety, public education, basically all services that people rely on day to day, and education, out of property tax? People who own property have to pay for all that. And you know why? They don't want to raise the income tax. They don't want to raise the sales tax. Do you know what? Things cost money. We have to stop this obsession with taxes. You know, where else do we expect everything to be just free? You know, I'm tired of hearing the county, people in the county patting themselves on the back, the county commissioners, because they haven't raised taxes. Well, big deal. You know, the services are still expected. The services should be delivered, what we're doing, and they are being delivered, but at what cost? So, you know, let's, as voters, get over it. You're going to have to pay taxes, you know? And don't let these politicians get elected simply because they tell you they're not going to raise taxes. Well, what are they going to do to keep the wheels on the car without taxes? So, you know, the reason the state budget isn't passed, 2 reasons. Nobody wants to say they raised taxes, and nobody wants to give the other guy credit. Get over it. Mike, I think you should go back there and tell those guys they're not going to get their paychecks until the budget's passed. You'd see a budget passed damn quick if they weren't getting their paychecks. So now I'm getting all upset. My prom queen crown is about to tilt. So anyhow, I welcome your questions and a lively debate.
Good morning. Thank you for that overview of various issues that affect the day-to-day life of Lancastrians. Jim, I have a question for you, which is I can agree with you more in terms of trying to convert renters to homeowners. And, you know, one of the things that is an issue in the city is critical repairs and helping people be able to stay in their homes. And the funding for critical repairs has decreased over time. And Pat, correct me, is that come out of CDBG funding? No.
It's HUD. It is HUD,
okay.
yeah.
So we've seen that decline over time. And I'm just wondering, because one of the barriers to home ownership is that, you know, if your roof starts leaking, you have to fix it, your landlord doesn't. Have you seen any innovative programs to help support homeowners at certain income levels be able to make those repairs and be able to anticipate those repairs before, you know, they have a leaking roof or their furnace is breaking down in the middle of the dead of winter?
Yep. First of all, there's no federal monies involved other than block grant monies from CDBG, and that's basically a local priority. In other words, as you know, the CDBG program have come up with their own budget from a standpoint of what are priorities. City of Lancaster, as well as other cities, have now gone into the situation where they're using it for basic services. Mm-hmm. So as a result, things like homeowner repair get short-shrifted even in the CDBG budget simply because of the fact that the city needs some of those dollars for basic services. So that's one thing, is in fact say to yourself, well, can we do something here other than use it for basic services? Can we in fact put it in that way? Second, so there isn't any other federal money available. There used to be years ago a federal program for rehabbing houses. That's long gone. At the state level, combination of both DCED and PHFA, there is no such animal. So there's no state monies. So then what it comes down to is local dollars. And so the situation is, where do you come up with local dollars to fix houses? What we're trying to do at LHOP is we're trying to, in fact, raise dollars ourselves so that, for example, for the first time ever, we've actually gone out and gotten monies from institutions like Fulton Bank and PNC Bank Steinman Foundation. We're raising our own dollars in terms of trying to be able to come up with ways by which we can use local dollars to, in fact, do that, the kind of program you're talking about. So the situation is, yeah, we're raising our own dollars because, quite frankly, the federal and state dollars aren't there any longer, and so we have to do it at our own. So, yes, there are other cities that have, in fact, used other dollars to, in fact, do that. We're trying to emulate that.
Can I just add on the, when Jim talks about the CDBG, and that's Community Development Block Grants, funds, having to use those for local services, that's a serious problem. And in Lancaster, those funds are used to pay for housing inspectors, two housing inspectors. We have, right now, we have 9 inspectors for, a very densely populated city, as you well know. So that's a huge workload. If we lose any more CDBG funds, that's going to really jeopardize the housing inspection program. Sadly, I'm very sad to say, it's very sad to say that President Obama, I think last year's continuing resolution actually was opposing an increase and supporting a decrease in CDBG funds. So.
Yeah, I think that's really a really important point. It's not that CDBG doesn't work. It's been around for 40 years. It works. It's not that Section 8 doesn't work. It's been around for 30 years or more. It works. These are programs that work. Why Congress continues to underfund programs that work? The child care program, okay? Head Start works. It's worked for 40 years. They continue to underfund it. And nobody seems to be paying any attention. We're more worried about Benghazi than we are about our domestic program.
Mm-hmm. One quick thing, and this is not the solution to it, but I think you can start to piece something together. I know at the state level, we said to the utilities, you need to cut the amount of electric used in the state of Pennsylvania. So, you need to start getting people to be more energy efficient. So you saw the utilities start to say, we'll sell you light bulbs that are energy efficient for $1 instead of $6, and we'll do some of those kind of things. If we can, and again, I guess we could mandate it somehow, but if you start to say when that person's furnace goes out, if the gas company is willing to install a new furnace for them, instead of saying, oh, and there's your bill for $4,000, how about if the gas company says, not only is it more energy efficient, and you were paying, $300 a month for your oil bill on a budgeted thing, you're only actually going to pay $100 for the gas, but how about if you continue to pay $300 and you pay that furnace off over a 2 or 3 or 5 year period? The gas company has the capital to say, we'll invest in that furnace. Basically put a lien on the house and say, you're going to pay it off in your gas bill over the next 5 years. The same way the city does some of this stuff with, if somebody doesn't fix their sidewalk, the city eventually comes in and says, we're going to fix the sidewalk and put a lien on your house. If there are ways that you can say, and in your tax bill, you start to pay that off at, $100 a year. It may take 10 years to pay off that sidewalk. That sidewalk's going to last for 30 or 40 years. So I think there are ways that we can start to patch together some things to help with that, but it's not an easy task because it's not the same source in all those cases. It's a different source all the way along. So the other thing I'd like to see, just as a homeowner, is I would love to see my taxes be able to be paid on a monthly basis as opposed to 3 times a year, whether it's county or local taxes, because you get that 1 month where it's like, holy mackerel, I got to come up with a couple grand this month in taxes, and if you're a good saver, that's okay. If you had, I'll get to that next month, those things are really impactful to a whole lot of people. And I always like to say, I never mind paying my local taxes because when I compare them on a monthly basis to my cable bill, I'm getting 24-hour police and fire protection, roads paved, all my city services, and it's less than my cable bill. Are you serious? It is the biggest bargain there ever was. So,
attaboy.
yeah.
if I can, just real quick, and it has to do, and I'm going to ask you to talk to Jim Schultz about this afterwards. And it has to do with zoning and inclusionary zoning. You've all read about Belmont. That's a big lifestyle type development going on out there in Manheim Township by Fruitville Pike. There's a proposal for Conestoga Crossings. That's where the Wegmans is going to be. We need to, as a community, challenge the elected officials in those localities to use zoning laws to not to exclude low-income people, because we need to make sure zoning laws are inclusionary, so that when you have those housing developments and those opportunities, that they are, mixed income housing, and that's what we need. That would help with the housing crisis in a big way.
Well, there's no question about it. I mean, basically, for example, Urban Outfitters. There are now proposals in front of the township down in that area where Urban Outfitters is going. Basically, the attitude of the township is, well, yeah, we created the jobs and we created the tax base, improved our tax base. If those people who now are working there want to live somewhere, they can live in the city.
Yeah, it's a serious problem with respect to housing, exclusionary zone.
Thanks for your service for each of you. And one of the pieces that I love about Assets is the emphasis on entrepreneurship, right? I mean, that's one of the things that we just love. And so when we came in this morning, we got the quality rental housing for Lancaster County. And one of the things on the first page that kind of just jumped out that I'd never heard before is that it's estimated that Lancaster County will need to add over 1,400 rental units per year for the next 5 years. And even while we believe in home ownership as a goal, there still is a need for short-term or for rentals for a variety of reasons. And so I'm sitting here this morning and I was thinking, as an entrepreneur, would I right now want to invest my money in solving that need? It looks like a massive, massive market opportunity to say there's a need for more rentals, but there's something that is perhaps causing the entrepreneurs to say, we're not going to step in and meet this need. And so just listening to the comments this morning, there was a lot of emphasis on the negative, on the irresponsible rental owners, on the irresponsible slumlords. And honestly, I'm here I'm looking for some positive on this. So we've talked a lot about what's wrong. What more could we do to find the creative entrepreneurs that don't mix that actually care about the people and care about the properties? What more could we do on the positive side to say, let's raise up some entrepreneurs to really do what is good for housing?
Well, the thing you need to do is get involved at the local level, at the township level, if you're going to meet that housing need, because you have a built environment, you have a limited number of instances where you could build, and quite frankly, the city's done a great job over the last 10 years of filling all the large buildings. All the large buildings are now filled. There's very little resources out there in terms of buildings. So you have to go out into the burbs. The problem is that the comp plans do not reflect housing. They do not reflect particularly affordable housing. So the long and short of it is you got to get involved in East Tenfield Township right now, where they're putting together their plan for the next 10 years in terms of what they want to see East Tenfield Township be. If you're not there around the table saying we need affordable housing in this community, it's not going to happen. Then in turn, what they have to do is put the zoning in place, and the zoning's got to reflect that. I can't go out there and say to a landowner, I'm going to take your land, which is now zoned agricultural, and I'm going to make it into housing, because guess what? The township's not going to let me do that. They're not going to let me rezone. So you have to get involved at the comp level, and you have to get at the zoning level. Those 1,400 housing units per year is absolutely, it's part of the LHOP market analysis. One of the most comprehensive market analysis has been done in the entire United States. That is a reflection of reality, and we're not dealing with reality out in the burbs.
Well, and one of the things I think that has to happen, and was mentioned here, it has to be a requirement for mixed income. And, to that thing that I talked about earlier with concentration of poverty, we have a tendency to say, and, if you ask anybody who's building moderate and low to moderate income housing right now, if they don't get a subsidy, they can't physically build it for the cost that they can rent it for. Yep. So they absolutely need a subsidy in order to even build it. But if you say, and so the only thing that's getting built is the people say, you know what, I can actually get $1,500 a month for an apartment. So those you can afford to build. And so that's all that gets built. If we instead say, when you do that, you also got to mix in some low and moderate income. Not only is it good for the community and those people living in that low and moderate income housing, because now they get to say, those people, when they go on vacation, I sit their dog and I get a little extra income. When they have extra stuff, they give it to me. That's a community. That's what, But if you say everybody that lives in that neighborhood or that apartment complex is making $90,000 a year, and if you're making 30, you can go live in the city. That just exacerbates the problem. So if there's not those requirements up front, the only thing that's ever going to get built is the stuff that's for the people that are making $90,000 a year.
You're absolutely right about the entrepreneurial aspect of those numbers. What I'm saying to you is that the opportunities out in the burbs are just not there unless you're willing to play the game of getting the law changed at the local level.
And that really would solve a lot of problems.
No question about it.
Zoning, exclusionary zoning is a huge problem. Would you agree? And as Jim pointed out, the city is pretty infilled in, and all, everything's pretty packed. That's not to say there isn't more to do. One of the things that, and I'll leave some strategic plans up here. This is what I have with me today is the third strategic plan that we have, and in each of the strategic plans that this administration has put forth, we've talked about economic integration, and that means you don't put. You can mix people. It says it is what it says it is. It's we need to be concerned about how we put people in neighborhoods or in communities based on how much money they earn. We benefit as a community when we can have economic integration and not a concentration of wealth on north side of King and a concentration of poverty south side of King. That has to change now. And I think when you talk about the need for rental properties, one of the things that we've been looking at, and we're beginning to change our zoning laws to accommodate the new reality in the city, and that is that we're getting a lot of younger folks in. The average age is 30,000, or excuse me, is age 30, and there's a greater demand and a desire among that demographic to have rent, to not own, to rent, and to share living with people with whom they're not related. So we've changed zoning to accommodate that reality. Where rental properties and multi-unit dwellings are more doable and affordable, and unrelated individuals living together is more allowable. So.
Well, in the interest of time is always short for these conversations, which is the one downside of it. But today's election day. I think the important piece of this is recognizing how, no matter where we live, in the city or in the communities around the city, to get to know your local government, get to know who's on the ballot, get to know what they stand for, what they're interested in, and cast your votes accordingly to what you believe. Engage them. I can speak, how rewarding it's been for me to get to know Pat and the mayor and to understand a little bit more about what their agenda is for the city as a city resident and a city taxpayer. But to encourage all of us to do that wherever we live. And spend a little bit of time, maybe if you have any other questions about what the significance of today's election means. I know that there's the things that I understand about it is that it's really heavy on Supreme Court justices, and that's going to play out for the next 10 years, depending on who gets elected and how they play their roles in our state government. So if you have more questions, I'm sure anybody at Frank could talk to you about what those implications are. But in the interest of time, we need to wrap up. I wanted to thank everybody for being here. Thank you three in particular for sharing. Thanks for taking the time on election day to be here. I also wanted to say thanks to Solutions by Cat and the For Your Info podcast. They've been reporting this morning. They've been reporting for us all the breakfast series so that they're available online. And that if you have any questions about being recorded, to make sure to talk to them at the end. Come back for our last breakfast. It's going to be Tuesday, December 1st here at Southern Market. Pete Barker, their Kudos, Shridas Gupta, the owner of Upahar, and Jenny Groff, the owner of Stroopies, which won our Great Social Enterprise Pitch, are going to be talking about what their motivations are as for-profit entrepreneurs and trying to use their business models in a different way in the community. So come back and hear that for our last panel, and talk to us as well about what you want to see going forward for 2016, because we've kind of made this up on the fly, and we want to do more of this. We've seen a lot of interest, a huge diversity of people who come, different groups of people for every single breakfast we've had. So we'd love to do more of this. We'd love your feedback as we build the plan for 2016. And one other note, we are going to have a fundraising gala on Thursday, December 3rd at Springhouse Brewery. Wanted to focus a business in South Lancaster City, since that's a focus for us of economically disadvantaged parts of Lancaster City. So we're working with Springhouse to showcase their local food and drink, and we're going to have Christmas trees for sale and Christmas gifts that are all coming from our entrepreneurs that we've worked with, who are low and moderate income entrepreneurs and social entrepreneurs, showcasing diversity of business ownership in Lancaster. So come out for that. It's going to be a fun night, great place to get food and drink and Christmas gifts. And on that note, thank you everybody for coming, and go vote.
Thanks for joining us in Localist Policies by Assets Lancaster. Thanks again to our sponsors, ERX Contracting and Solutions by CAT, marketing and advertising with passion. This has been For Your Info Podcasts.